Hi everybody, welcome to today's virtual session. As always, lovely to be here and bring this to you for Creative Wellness Journey. My name is Emma Morrissey, if you haven't seen any of these tutorials before. So today I wanted to talk you through a watercolour based tutorial. This is the image we're going to be working from. I'll make sure you have the link to this so you can follow along with me. What I have done is I've done a very basic pencil outline of this first. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can sort of observe the image for a while and then just sort of start to do some very basic pencil lines. Or if you have access to a printer, you can print this image out and then you can put some pencil on the back of it and then flip it back over so it's facing the right way up, and then sort of do a tracing of that. But by all means, if you want to pause this and just get your basic sketch in first, that's fine, and then I'll talk you through the painting process. So for the painting side of it, as this tutorial is a little bit more in depth, I've got 3 different brushes here. They're all round head brushes. In terms of the numbers, I'll let you know. If you don't happen to have these specific ones, do not worry. I'll talk you through that in a minute. So I have a 12, which is my largest. I have a 6 and a number 3. So if you don't have these specific numbers, as I said, don't worry. The main thing is to make sure that you do have sort of a large-ish round head brush, and then just 2 slightly smaller ones, but you could ideally just work with 2, one larger, one smaller. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is going to go into my little pot of water, which is just out of shot, but you'll see me put some water on this. I'm going to do what's called the wet and wet technique. So I'm going to pop my brush into a little bit of water, and I'm just going to put the water, you should be able to see this on the camera, just over where the teapot is. I'm working quite quickly because you don't want this sort of glistening to run out. You want that glistening to stay there. I'm going to go right into some colour, and I'm just going to start to put some colour in, and you'll see it sort of fans out a little bit. And where you've put the water is where the paint will go to. So it will go sort of within those parameters of where you put the water. So it does sort of do some of the work for you within reason. And the reason for this is a wonderful way of just getting all your colour in quickly, and for the purpose of this tutorial it works wonders as well. Okay, and I'm going to do the same with the cup. Because I've got quite a lot of water in my brush already, then I'm just going to do a very sort of watery version, just to get some colour and to use up the colour that's on my brush already. I'm going to go into some more water. So you basically just want to get all of the colour in. And again, keep looking at the reference photo to help you. Once you've got the main bulk in, of course we've been using our larger brush here, once you've got that in, then you can move to a smaller one. And that's just so you can move some of the paint around into the sort of finer detailed areas, and you can start to add some detail as well. Now, as I always say, this is going to be your version. Okay, so it's not sort of going to be an exact replica. This is going to be your version of this. So you just want to work on it very slowly, bit at a time. If you feel that your brush starts to get a little bit dry, you just need a spot of water. You don't want too much, because obviously the more water you have when you're sort of adding paint in specific areas, you want better control. The idea of doing the wet and wet technique first, as we just did, where you wet the surface first and then add your paint, that's really good for getting sort of large areas filled quickly with your colour. It helps you just to sort of get started with things, particularly if you're doing a subject matter that perhaps you're not particularly used to doing. It just is a really, really good technique to get you started. Okay, something I wanted to show you, as this is a slightly more in-depth tutorial, is how you can pull paint out. So there are some areas here which you can see I've got yellow in. So what you can do, if you haven't left space or you've gone over it, particularly with the wet and wet technique, as you can see, what you can do is you can pull paint out. So what you need to do is just clean your brush out, go into some water, and then just start to pull paint out. Just go backwards and forwards, just pull that paint out. I'm just going to put the excess paint onto me, just because I don't have a paper towel nearby. But if you have a paper towel, please do utilize it. A tissue, a cloth, anything will help. But this is a very, very good technique. It helps you to also erase things. So if you've put paint in the wrong place, for example, it doesn't mean that you've ruined your painting. You can just pull that paint right out just by using the water. Alright, so as you can see, I'm pulling this paint out, and where the surface is still wet, where we did the wet and wet technique, that's quite helpful. Alright, so just keep moving that paint. There we go. Alright, so I've pulled some areas of paint out. I'm going to go in with some yellow now. Again, I'm not being too specific with this, I'm just putting just some basic sort of light areas. Again, I'm looking at my reference photo. And you're just going to build this up a bit at a time. Okay? Bit at a time. Gradually deepening and darkening the colours as you go. So the other good reason to do the sort of the wet and wet technique is, apart from it helping you to fill an area quickly, but also where you've got a lot of water involved, it dilutes the paint and makes it lighter. So when you're starting out a painting and you're not quite sure about the colours, you're not quite sure about the tones, the amount of colour, by starting off light, you can gradually get darker and darker in intensity. And that's very common when you're working in watercolour. For those of you who have sort of used watercolour a bit before, and perhaps you've seen some of my other tutorials, you'll know that traditionally when painting in something like oil paint, it was always the sort of known method to start dark to light. But when you're working in watercolour, it's the opposite. You want to work light to dark. It's much, much easier to darken it once you've got those initial washes in place. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just start to deepen some of these areas a little bit. Just make them a little bit more specific. And just build it up a bit at a time. And dart your gaze backwards and forwards. Helps you keep track of the area that you're working on. Okay, so just keep building that up. I'm just adding a little bit more paint to my brush each time, and then I'm using the water to move it around so that it looks a little bit smoother. And just experiment, have fun with it. Try different things. As I said, if you do find that you've made a mistake or you've put paint in the wrong place or the paint is a bit too dark or too thick, you can always add water to just dilute it. You can move that paint. And obviously, for the purposes of today's tutorial, this will still look a little bit lighter in intensity, but obviously do feel free to take your time on this if you want to take longer and work on things. I absolutely encourage that. But what I'm going to do, just for a little bit of quickness, I'm going to move to my larger brush again, and you can do this as well if you're sort of rushed on time and you need to sort of get things done. You can absolutely use larger brushes. It helps you to get things completed a little bit quicker because you're able to fill areas and complete paintings quicker often. But absolutely, if you want to take your time and sort of do this more slowly, you absolutely can. What I'm doing now is I'm just going in with a little bit of brown, so it's this colour that I've used here, which you'll probably find in your standard watercolour set. You should have a lighter brown and a darker brown, so go with your lighter of the two. I'm just working that in just for the slightly darker shaded areas surrounding. Where my paper is still a bit wet, it will do some of the work for me. Watercolour does dry much lighter as well, as you may know. So often if you want an area to be a little bit darker or more intense in terms of colour, you need to add more paint to it because it will dry much paler. And you will find as you continue to add your layers that it can take a little bit of time before you see it sort of start to come to life, but it will do. Just going to widen that a little bit. Just keep building it up. The trick to most things, as I say in pretty much all of my tutorials, is the observation part of it. So you want to keep observing, looking back at your reference photo, looking at your painting and thinking, have I missed anything? Is there anything here that needs to go somewhere? Do I need more colour? Is it light enough? Is it dark enough? Just ask yourself those questions when you're creating. Alright, so I'm going to just hold that up just so you can see it a little bit more clearly, and I'm going to start to work on this cup now. So again, just looking at the reference photo all the time, just to help. I'm still using my larger brush as well. As I said, for the purpose of this tutorial, this is going to be a very sort of light version. Sometimes doing light sort of wash type watercolour paintings can be really quite beautiful because they have a certain delicacy to them in the way that they look, and they don't look too bold, they look very gentle, so that can be quite a nice effect if that's the effect that you would like to go with. If you want something a bit more bold, more detailed, then obviously do feel free to work a little bit longer on your painting, as I said. Just going to pop the bottom of it on there. There we go. Just I'm going to build this up a little bit more. Just move this into the center a little bit more so the camera so you can see it a bit better. Okay, so I've got the majority of the main sort of bulk of the detail in. I'm just going to go around the outside now with a little bit of sort of blue here and there, especially for the shading on the inside of the cup. Not a lot, just a little bit, just to sort of give that impression of a shadow. And I will put some underneath and around the teapot as well. I'll pop a little bit of water down first. So again, wet and wet technique. What that will do is just give the appearance of a shadow, so it doesn't look like it's floating, so it will actually look like it is sat on something. Okay. So as I said, do feel free to take your time with this. If you want to sort of pause the video at any time and you want to go back to any bits or change anything, if you want to start again, do feel free to sort of stop and restart the video if you need to. Right, so I'm just putting some detail around here now. Again, what this does is it just sort of gives it the impression that it is actually sat on something rather than just sort of floating. I'm just going to pop a little bit more blue under here. Okay. Oh. Now this is a good little technique to actually show you how you can remove some, because I put a little bit too much there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lift this out. I'm going to lift it out and I'm just going to move some of it around. So you can utilise any paint you've got, you can utilise the water, and just by thinning some of this out, so I'm going to just move some of it around and then just sort of thin it out using the water so it's not quite so intense. Alright, so you can see that just using the water sort of as an eraser, really. It's a water eraser. Alright, there we go. Do a couple more small touches to this using the darkest brown that I've got. Just going to pop some of that around here because this is sort of the most sort of shaded area, so I just want to pop some of that in there. There we go. Not too much, just a little bit. As I said, you just keep building it up a layer at a time. So this is layering that we've been doing. And it's very important in watercolour to layer things and gradually add more detail with each layer. Now if you want to get detail which is very specific, then you need to make sure that that layer underneath is completely dried. Otherwise you'll start to move those layers of paint around that are still wet. Now unless that's sort of a look that you're specifically going for, then it's not probably needed or wanted if you want something that's a bit more precise and you want to sort of go on top another layer that's really quite detailed, then it needs to be dry. Okay, so just a couple more finishing touches here and there just to give you an idea on how you can build a watercolour painting. I make this a little bit darker, so what I've done is I've mixed a little bit of my dark brown with my blue. And I'm looking at the darkest areas of shade here, just to help me. And add a little bit over here as well. Not too much, just a little bit. Sometimes the smallest amount can make the biggest difference. And often if you want to do a shadow and you might find that black is a bit too intense, then mixing a dark brown with a dark blue can work really, really well. Okay. Alright, so there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you again soon for the next one.